Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Thanks, Sherry, and thank you, Global Patties. You know, each week we get to talk about how much we appreciate our sponsor support, and you know we'd rather get right to talking about bees. However, our great sponsors are critical to help making all this happen. From the hosting fees to software to hardware, microphones, and recorders, they enable each episode. So with that, thanks to Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture's been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is now evolving into a regular newsletter. So check them out at www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with the number 2. And they are continuing to produce the 2 Million Blossoms podcast. You can check that out on the website as well. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're really, really happy you're here. Hey, Kim, you feeling a little bloated and still tired from that Thanksgiving duck you ate?
Neither of the above. I practice moderation in all things, and if you believe that.
Wait, what? Who is this? Where is Kim, and what have you done to him?
Yeah, it was a good day. It's been a good few days, and I'm sorry it's over, but it was good fun while it lasted.
Yeah,
lots of family.
Back to work. Well, we're happy to be out here for our friends and listeners who are listening on your Monday morning commute. We can commiserate with you on this first day of work after the Thanksgiving holiday. Hey, Kim, before we get going much further, I want to recognize the fact that in November, we lost 2 great beekeepers.
Yeah, it was a tough month, Jeff. Dr. Roger Hoopengarner up in Michigan passed. He was, I want to say, in his 90s. Mm-hmm. Had a full life in the world of bees and beekeeping, and there will be more information coming out on his career and accomplishments shortly. And of course, Tom Theobald, who was with us a couple of times, and has his own. I guess you'd call it his own podcast. He's reading like 10, 12 years of his magazine articles that he has on a webpage, so you can tune in and listen to that, Beekeeping with Tom. It's beekeeping, but it's about a lot of other things. So, yeah, 2 good friends in the last couple of weeks.
It's a rough month. I met Roger one time, and that was when you sent me down to Mexico way back in 1993 to do the story with him and Chip Taylor on the Africanized bees down in Linares, Mexico. And Roger was a super kind, good-hearted person. He's sorely missed, I'm sure, by his family.
Yep.
And Tom was a great beekeeper, and I loved having him on the show. And he lived there where I did in Colorado. So,
yeah.
2 great beekeepers. Kim, you and Jim on Honeybee Obscura have been doing a lot of great work. What's all this episode about smells that you just got? Just came out at the end of the month.
Episodes.
Yeah, 2 episodes.
And we got to talk, and one of the things, after you've been keeping bees for a while, you don't even notice some of the things that are out there when you're in a bee yard, bee house, whatever. And we went back and kind of looked at them individually. What kinds of smells do bees make? What kind of smells do bee products make? What does your bee house smell like? And what about honey? Every honey has its own distinctive flavor. When I did the book with Marina, the American Honey Tasting Society, one of the things we talked about in detail was the smell of honey, how you taste the smell. And that's exactly what you do. So we brought all of those together. There's good smells, and there's bad smells, and there's the smell that sticks to your bee suit all year long because of your smoker. And we brought all those together. And what we hope you can do is, if you're new at this, learn to recognize them and enjoy them, because each one of them is a story it's telling you. And if you've been at this a long time, pick up and try and remember what it's telling you again, because we too often take them for granted.
I enjoyed the episodes. It made me think of all the smells I really enjoy about beekeeping. And one of those really is the smell of my hands after working the hives for several hours, just kind of a mixture of the propolis, the wax, the honey, a little bit of smoke. I almost don't want to wash them afterwards, but Sherry says I have to. So
I think the one that I like the best is the one that probably a lot of people listening to this like the best also, if you think about it for the moment. It's the first time you ever opened the top of a beehive without a smoker. Mm-hmm. And the aroma that floats up. It happened to me. The guy that introduced me to bees was Dr. Eric Erickson up in Wisconsin at the bee lab there, and he took me out. He didn't have a veil on, didn't have a bee suit. He just very slowly, quietly lifted the roof off and told me to lean down and smell. And he says, "You'll remember that the rest of your life." And he was exactly right.
Yeah, that is a great thing.
Jeff, I just want to remind you and everybody else about the newsletter that we're going to start coming out, the regular newsletter to people who've signed up for it on our webpage. There's a spot out on the webpage. We need your email. And once we get that, we're going to start sending it out we're going to start about once a month and see how it goes. But it's going to come out early. The first one's coming out early December, and then about once a month after that. And if you're interested, we're going to be talking about the people that we visit with, the people we don't visit with, and some things about running the program, some of the things that we found out in the past, some of the things we're hoping to do in the future, and some of the things I don't even know what we're going to tell you yet.
Well, some of the behind-the-scenes secrets of producing a podcast.
There you go. So go to the webpage. What's the webpage, Jeff?
www.beekeepingtodaypodcast.com.
And there's a place on the webpage where
you can. If you just go to the website, after a few seconds, it'll pop up a little screen that asks you if you want to subscribe to the newsletter. Go ahead and do that, and go ahead and feel free to do that. We do not sell the newsletter list. We do not share it with anybody. It just keeps here with Kim and me, and we keep it top secret.
Yep, we do. And I know because I get too many emails from people who have sold my name. There are a few things in life that irritate me more than that, so we're certainly not going to indulge in that. So go to the webpage, sign up for the newsletter, look for it in early December, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. And Kim, we want to talk, just remind listeners, we do have transcripts of each episode out there available to read. So if you catch something on the podcast, you aren't sure of the spelling, not sure of what we actually said, or you just prefer to read the podcast, you can do that by clicking on transcripts on our website for each episode. So, Kim, coming up, we have an old friend of yours, Ross Conrad. This will be my first time I get to meet him, but I've read his articles in Bee Culture for quite a while.
Yeah, Ross started writing when I was at Bee Culture and has continued for years and years and years. We worked together. He and President Bill Mayers up in Middlebury, Vermont, worked together and put on EAS up there a dozen years ago. And he's got a new book out on the history of beekeeping in Vermont, and I look forward to talking with him about it.
He wrote the blurb on the back of your latest book, didn't he?
He did. I was quite pleased that he did that, because that new book, of course, is Common Sense Natural Beekeeping, and if you're going to get a blurb on the back of the book, you get one from the guy who wrote the book on natural beekeeping.
Yeah. Well, very good. And we're going to have just before we jump off, we're going to have your co-author on the show here in a couple weeks also.
Yeah, Stephanie's coming along, and she has a lot. She knows a lot about this that I don't know. I know a lot about the things that she wasn't familiar with. So we put our heads together, and I think we came up with a pretty good approach to common sense natural beekeeping.
Fantastic. All right, Kim. Well, let's get into our show with Ross. But first, a quick word from our friends at Strong Microbials.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. Unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbials Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
Hey, and while you're at the Strong Microbial site, make sure you click on and subscribe to The Hive, their regular newsletter full of important beekeeping news and product updates. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Sitting across the virtual Zoom table right now is none other than Ross Conrad. Ross, welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast.
Oh, thanks. Good to see you guys.
Hey, Ross, we haven't been together either virtually or physically in way too long a time, I think. I'm going to say the last EAS we had in Vermont was the last time I was in the same place with you. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, actually, that does sound about right.
It's been too long.
Almost 10 years ago. Do you realize that?
Yes. Well, it's good to see you again, and I'm anxious to talk to you. We're anxious to talk to you about a couple of three things. One, you just had an article in Bee Culture magazine about the EpiPen, and I want to go into some detail on that in a minute. You seem to be the only voice making any noise about this in the beekeeping world, and I think more people need to know about it. And then I want to talk to you about your new book, the one with Bill Mares, and then your other book, the Natural Beekeeping book. So let's start with the EpiPen event. That's what I call it, kind of, because I hope what you did in bee culture raises enough hackles that somebody does something.
That would be nice, but I'm not holding my breath, unfortunately.
So describe the issue at hand.
Well, basically, it's a problem with our for-profit healthcare system that really focuses more on profit rather than really taking care of people. And it played out with the whole EpiPen episode where the companies that were producing it were able to squelch the competition in terms of the generic versions and basically corner of the market, get a monopoly, and then slowly over years raise the price astronomically. And it's all perfectly legal. Yeah. That's the beauty of it. They have gone to court and the courts are saying they have to kind of pay back some of the overcharges, but no one's, fined really or, admitted guilt or going to jail. It's all, the way the system is designed to work.
So just for background, the EpiPen is used to administer epinephrine as a drug is to counteract the anaphylactic reaction to a bee sting. And other insect stings.
Yeah. Epinephrine is actually adrenaline. When you go into an anaphylactic shot, your body's shutting down and the adrenaline helps revive you so you can, get to a hospital and get medical help.
Yeah. And these are historically been suggested to beekeepers to keep in their bee kit in case they have a sudden reaction to a bee sting, where historically they haven't, and then suddenly they do. And that's usually what happens.
Yeah, or a passerby or somebody else. It's definitely as a beekeeper, I think a lot of beekeepers, I know I do. Have them around just in case.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing apitherapy.
I always had I always had a dozen in my refrigerator, both at work and at home, because we always had newspapers, magazines, television, whoever coming out to do news stories. And you get 6 or 8 people on a production unit. How many of them are going to have a problem if they get stung? And almost always somebody gets stung because they're trying to get up within a half an inch of the front door or within a half an inch at the top of the hive, or they want to see you put a bee on their finger. So we always had plenty of them. I don't have any anymore.
See, if you were keeping bees with friendly Vermont bees, you wouldn't have such problems.
Well, the bees weren't the problems. It was always the people trying to do something to the bees. They were sticking their fingers in their faces where they didn't belong, and the bees are going, I'm sorry, you shouldn't be doing this.
So you were saying in your article that there's a couple manufacturers kind of, I wouldn't say colluded, but they pretty much cornered the market to keep to keep the competition down, and then one went away and they upped the price from basically tens of dollars to hundreds of dollars per injection.
They did kind of collude, actually. Let's just be frank about it. The one dropped the generic version, and they worked a deal where they would share the profits from the EpiPen, which is the name brand that had the majority of the market, it was just unfortunate because, especially for people who do have allergies, severe allergies to bee stings, it's a life and death situation. And so they're going to buy it no matter what the price. And actually, the other problem that kind of think aggravates this is that they don't actually buy it, right? It's all done by insurance, a third party. And that's part of the problem. If somebody else is paying for it, it's kind of like you don't care. Whatever the price is, you want it, and let somebody else worry about covering the cost.
Right. So what's the footnote? What's the final outcome of this story? Is there anything happening in the background? Any updates?
Yeah. For Pfizer, their role in the charade, or whatever you want to call it, the court has ordered them to set aside a bunch of funds to pay back individuals. And actually, you have until November 12th. Which unfortunately, it sounds like this podcast isn't going to come out in time for folks to be able to apply to get reimbursed if they can prove and show that they purchased the EpiPen, within the last 8-10 years or whatever it was. So sorry, I just dated this whole thing. You probably
no, that's fine. So Kim, you're going to have to. Do you have the receipts from those 10 or 12 EpiPens you used to have around the house? You can get your money back. When I was
buying them, they were in the tens of dollars.
Yeah, I know.
They were easy.
Well, you don't look that old.
No, I don't. I looked at when the price bumped. I was getting them in a local drugstore, and I got a prescription from the doctor. I went in, and the guy said I have $125. What? The last time it was like $9.50 or something.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I got my first EpiPen years ago. It was less than 10, I think. It was cheap.
Oh, you guys got me. My first EpiPen was $35.
Well, even if it was 35, I'd have a couple around, just because of the number of people that I had around. But I quit inviting people to my bee yard.
Yeah.
Mm.
Unless you were a beekeeper and you told me you weren't allergic, but I wouldn't have brought in a crazy anchorman from the local news station on a bet anymore. Well, at least your article got out in time, Ross, which is good. At least some people will have some news, and I didn't catch the cutoff date in the article, so we're going to miss that.
Yeah, November 12th. Thanks to the folks at Bee Culture. For running that.
Yeah.
Our good sponsors. So that's good. And I would suggest to our listeners to double check on that. Sometimes those deadlines are extended. So you might want to double check on that if you have a pile of receipts for EpiPens over the last several years.
It's possible there'll be another opportunity with the other company that was involved. They haven't finalized their agreement with the court yet, and who knows, maybe they'll be required to offer additional funds to help reimburse folks. We'll see what happens.
Ross, I want to thank you for bringing it to everybody's attention, by the way. It went way over my head, and I hope it helps a lot of people.
Well, I have the advantage. I'm not a university professor, a scientist that's worried about my reputation. So I'll say stuff that most people usually don't have the guts to go out and say. So for better or worse, I might put my foot in my mouth sometimes. But.
No, I'm glad you did. And this will maybe help us, help other people get the word out.
Better Bee is pleased to sponsor today's episode of Beekeeping Today podcast. For over 40 years, Better Bee has supplied beekeepers across the country with the tools, equipment, and knowledge needed to succeed. Because many Better Bee employees are beekeepers themselves, they understand your needs and challenges and are better prepared to answer your beekeeping questions. From their colorful catalog to their support of beekeeper educational activities, including this podcast, Better Bee truly lives up to their tagline of beekeepers serving beekeepers. See for yourself at betterbee.com.
It's your new book, the one you did with Bill Mayers. Now, like I mentioned earlier a little bit ago, you and I and Bill Mayers did a lot at EAS when it was in Middlebury. What did you say, 10 years ago? Oh, my gosh.
It was 2012. Yep.
Yeah. Wow. But your new book just came out. It's the history of beekeeping in Vermont.
Yep. A land of milk and honey. It was a lot different from my first book, a heavier lift. It started out for me just learning about some of the phenomenal beekeepers here in Addison County, where I'm situated, were nationally, even internationally recognized, all throughout, going back 150 years. And I was thinking, this would be an interesting book. And I actually had started working on it. And then I ran into Bill Mayers, who was actually at the time, a couple years later, working on a book on the history of all of Vermont. So we decided to pool our resources and efforts, and we pulled in a few other beekeepers from the Vermont Bee Association to help with it, to do some of the research part. And Bill and I did primarily the actual writing of the book and organizing it, that kind of thing.
Well, it's an interesting book for sure. And I think not being from Vermont, I didn't have the history that you guys do with almost everybody that you were talking about. But the one person I, of course, recall was Bill Mayers, because he wrote for Bee Culture magazine when I was there for a whole lot of years. And I'll be very careful here. He and I bumped heads sometimes, and he and I hugged sometimes because of the beliefs that we had and shared and didn't have and didn't share. But he was always an interesting character.
Beekeepers tend to be.
Well, he pretty, according to what you've told me and what I read, he pretty much was your mentor.
Bill Mraz, yes. Bill Mayers, different person.
That's who I meant. Bill. Did I say Bill Mraz? Bill Mayers. Bill Mraz is who I meant.
Okay, it's a similar name, so it's easy to get confused. But yeah. Him and Charlie Mraz. Yep, that's where I started my beekeeping, basically. As I talk about in Natural Beekeeping, my first book had a spiritual experience with a honeybee, and because of that, I accepted a job working full time with Bill and Charlie Mraz, which most people in their right minds, don't work and jump at a career opportunity to work with millions of stinging insects that could potentially kill you. But because I had this really spiritual experience, I decided to take the job, and it changed my whole life.
Of course, I was referring to Bill's dad, Charles Mraz, when I was talking about writing for Bee Culture, and yes, that's Charles and I bumped heads and hugged off and on over all of the years that he worked for us, but he was always a treat every month.
He was quite a guy. I was glad I got to meet him.
Yes, and one of the things that Charles did that I found just fascinating, he more or less, correct me if I'm wrong here, developed a technique for collecting bee venom for medical use. I went with him one time when he did that. And Jeff, have you ever seen that done, collecting bee venom?
No, I've seen video of it. I've not seen it live.
Okay.
Only what I've collected personally.
Okay.
I've seen that quite a bit.
Ross, have you seen it? Did you?
Oh yeah, I did it with him and with Bill. It was one of the yearly tasks that we did. In fact, I would get hazard pay, extra pay to do it because it's the closest to working with Africanized bees I probably ever, and hopefully
definitely.
will ever come. Yeah, every bee hive in the yard is on full alert and very defensive. And I remember we were in at one yard, and the road was, a couple 100 feet away, and we were collecting venom and, just tens of thousands of bees only are stinging anything that moves. And somebody pulled up that I apparently knew, Bill or Charlie, and got out of the car to say hi. And as soon as they got out of the car, they were like, and they jumped back in the car. And they were out of there. It gets a little hairy. Psychologically, it's tough. If you think about, as you know, Kim, probably from your experience, you're sitting there and just bees are like hitting your veil as if it was raining out. They just constantly boom, boom, boom. And you're doing that for hours. It was a different, I didn't find it fun, but it was part of the job.
Double bee suits, double gloves. Make sure
and
you're
tape everything. Double tape.
Yeah, I was going to say yards and yards of duct tape. Yep.
Yikes.
But it was knowing where it comes from, and quickly, Ross, can you just a basic outline of what the beekeepers are doing to get the bees to do that?
Well, Charlie invented, and his son, Bill, who's an engineer, actually more perfected this a mechanism that's basically a sheet of like plastic that you put a rubber membrane around it and seal it with gaskets and put it inside a wooden frame that kind of clamps it all together. And in that wooden frame, there's wires. And you hook it up to a battery, so every other wire is basically hot. And you stick that apparatus in front of the entrance of the hive, and you kick the hive. And when the bees come out angry, they land on that, and they get a hot foot. They sting the rubber membrane, deposit the venom underneath the membrane so it gets collected. And then after a few minutes, you move on to the next hive. And we'd always do it in the fall when the bees were the strongest, and they could afford to, lose a little bit, some population before going into winter, so their food would last longer. I got interesting memories from those days.
That the contraption sounds like something an older brother would make for a younger brother to experiment with. Is the first thought that came to mind. Just hold it out there and.
Are you an older brother?
No, I'm a younger brother.
I wanted to bring that up because of my experience with Charles and you being there at the same time. The book that you and Bill Mears did then, The Land of Milk and Honey, where is that available?
Oh, pretty much everywhere, all over the internet, or you could even, probably your local library could get it for you. And I think Bee Culture is carrying it.
Good. Well, the reason I suggest that, because although it's about the history of beekeeping in Vermont, the history of beekeeping in Vermont touches a lot of other places and a lot of other people. So not just Vermont beekeepers, I think, are going to benefit from reading it. Well,
yeah. What I realized in writing it is that Vermont kind of excels in certain aspects of beekeeping, mostly overwintering in a cold climate, and raising queens and nucleus colonies. And so in that aspect, I think just beekeepers everywhere could benefit from it. But really for us, what I find interesting is, looking at all the other history books on beekeeping out there, they're all about certain countries or the world. And you miss a lot of really interesting characters and information when you don't go down to the more granular level of the state. And so we in Vermont, having been the first to do a state-focused beekeeping history, we're really hoping that other states will follow us and do a similar thing, because there's so many interesting stories and characters that just get missed with those other more broad strokes of history. And I think we're missing a lot when we don't dig into those kind of histories on a more localized level.
Did you notice any significant differences or approaches between northern Vermont and southern Vermont?
Mostly in terms of forage, yes. There's certain areas of Vermont that are really good for bees, and other areas where you have to find that microclimate that works, but it's a little more challenging. That was one of the big ones for sure. And, Vermont, it's kind of a hilly state. It's not known for being very flat and not very, the land is kind of not always that accessible and easy, traveling and stuff. And so, those were the kind of things that jumped out more to me.
Well, Ross, you've got another book that's been out for a while, Natural Beekeeping, and it lends itself to being a good spokesperson for the folks who want to follow that path. How has that been doing, and are we looking at an update, do you think?
Well, I did an update in 2013. It first came out in 2007. But it's still holding up pretty well. At the time when I first came out with it, I was sticking my neck out, quite frankly.
You were.
There was no really other books that talked about alternative kind of ways of approaching beekeeping. And actually I got not a huge amount, but some flack, from beekeepers that were say all beekeeping's organic, or there's no such thing as organic, or just all kinds of interesting comments.
Wait, the discussion went from there's no such thing as organic beekeeping to the other side where everything about beekeeping is organic.
Depending on who I talk to, everyone had different opinions.
That's funny.
But those were from the old time beekeepers.
Right.
The new beekeepers that are coming in, they're looking for that kind of more information. I think there's more of a recognition that industrialized approaches to agriculture, which is ultimately a biological activity, is probably not, in most instances, the best approach to take.
So what is your definition of natural beekeeping? How do you define it in your book?
Well, I try to lay out all the different options to let people choose what works best for them, as opposed to prescribing. But generally speaking, it's working with the bees' natural instincts and tendencies in biology, rather than trying to force them to do something that you'd want them to do, avoiding the use of synthetic pesticides and chemicals, avoiding artificial feeding on a regular basis, avoiding antibiotics and drugs, and using alternative methods to keep the bees just as healthy, to still deal with those issues. You don't just ignore them and, do nothing and hope for the best. That unfortunately, because of the state of our environment these days, that tends not to work very well, generally speaking.
Yeah, it gets often confused between natural beekeeping is hands off, and that's not at all what you're saying.
Correct.
I found it interesting, and it was certainly a resource when Stephanie and I just did something called Common Sense Natural Beekeeping, and we moved up a step from you in terms of the things we were looking at. Probably you would consider them a little bit less natural than you were doing, but anyway, we're going to talk about that down the road. How was your season this year, Ross?
Well, it was mixed. It started out pretty good, but it was really dry here in Vermont. We actually had pretty serious drought conditions for a while. And then the later part of the season, it turned all around and got really wet. Unfortunately, my honey crop was down about a third from last year. And the big issue really was the quality. I got a lot of unripe honey, kind of high moisture. So that's what hurt the most for me. But, as they say in beekeeping, there's always next year.
There you go. Well, you're still selling honey every weekend at the Middlebury Farm Market?
Yeah, until I run out. Yeah, of the good stuff. I separated out the higher moisture stuff. So and I sell that as bakery grade to institutions, or actually, surprising number of people like the low price, and they just buy the 24-pound 2-gallon bucket and use it for their home honey for the year. It's fine. I mean, that's what we eat. Even if it ferments a little bit, it's still fine to eat. It's got a little more fruity taste. Got those beneficial bacteria in them. If it's good for the bees, it must be good for us.
There you go.
Just dig a little deeper. So how many bees are you running? How many colonies?
I try to keep around 100. I'm down to about 80 hives right now. Mm-hmm. I don't like to get it too big. I want to run my company. I don't want it to run me.
Sure.
That's a good philosophy.
Is it all liquid honey? Do you do any comb? Any cut comb?
Every now and then, I'll do some comb, not a lot. But it also depends on the year and how things are going. And then I sell some nukes, usually a little bit on the side, and do a little bit of just local pollination for some folks I know. And I keep it diversified, although really the big part of what I do is education, right? Through writings, through workshops and classes. And actually that's taken quite a hit with the pandemic. Unfortunately, I live here in rural Vermont. We don't, not yet anyway, have really good internet access. In fact, here I am at my local library who's got a good setup where my internet's not going to get interrupted and I won't, have frozen screens and lose my audio or just drop out completely. Didn't want to do that to you guys.
That's good.
But because of that, I haven't been doing even Zoom meetings much, which I have done a couple. And quite frankly, I don't enjoy them as much as just being in person, especially when you got bees right there too. That's the fun part.
Well, hopefully it's coming back.
We hope.
It seems to be. Yeah.
Well, just like all beekeeping, there's always next year, just like Ross said.
It's the mantra.
So what have we missed? What are you doing we haven't asked you about?
I guess the only thing that's going on still is trying to adjust to the new world that we've created collectively, with the climate that's becoming more and more unpredictable, the social and economic landscape that's becoming more and more unpredictable. Trying to navigate that, I think, is going to be for all beekeepers as we move forward here, one of the bigger lifts that we're going to be focused on.
Yeah, I think you hit the button there on climate. I've been doing some work along that, and it's worse than we think.
Worse than some people think. Unfortunately, the politicians are trying to keep us from thinking it's as bad as it is, so they don't get caught holding the bag.
It's probably pretty close to the truth there, I think. Yes, exactly.
But we are an apolitical podcast, so we won't go down too far down that rabbit hole.
Well, it's not. Is it really political? I mean, we're all part of this society. We all are contributing just by using the fossil fuels that are available to us. Right. So quite frankly, this is not really a political thing, and it's certainly going to affect the bees. It's certainly going to affect the beekeepers. And if we don't start changing the way we do things across the board, it's not, some people think just the governments and the businesses have to change, but quite frankly, people have to change at the same time, because governments and businesses tend to provide what their constituents or their customers want. So if the people don't change at the same time, of course, it would be nice if the governments and businesses help the people to change, but at the same time, the people need to be pushing the government and the people and the businesses to change. Because if we don't get it together real soon, it doesn't look good for the future of the bees or the beekeepers. Sorry to be a downer.
No, I was just thinking about the electric bee truck I ordered. I can't wait for that to show up.
There you go. Oh, there's some nice pickups out there now that are electric, and they're coming along, and they're finally starting to get on it. Yeah. They're seeing that, it could be a benefit for the economy, not necessarily, a hardship.
All right. Well, Ross, really appreciate you being on the show. Really enjoy your columns each month in bee culture, and look forward to having you back here in the future. In the future. Well,
it's great to see you guys again. It's been quite a while, and so hopefully down the road, who knows, maybe we can do something like this in person again.
That would be nice.
Yes, it was good seeing you again, Ross. Take care.
Yep.
Stay warm this winter.
Yeah, I got the firewood in. We're ready.
Good.
I've been looking forward to meeting Ross, and his story about the EpiPens was pretty important.
Yeah, it was. And I got to be honest, I was even looking more forward to just sitting down and chatting with him again, because over the years we've spent a lot of time together, and over the last couple of years, no time. What did you say? 10 years. It's been since we were together when EAS was up in up in Vermont. But yeah, what he had to say today, his article out of the blue, and I'm really surprised that nobody much has picked up on that and that deadline. I hope that people are able to take advantage of that. I'm perfectly honest. You can't be a beekeeper without having an EpiPen in the refrigerator.
Like I mentioned when we're talking to Ross, I had one years ago, and it just, I think I eventually lost it behind the seat of the pickup truck or something like that, and I've never gotten a new one. And at $600 a pop, I'm not sure if I can run out and get one now.
Well, I don't bring people over to my bee yard anymore for that reason.
Yeah.
They may think that they're not allergic, and ding, and they tip over, and I can avoid that by not inviting people. What I can't avoid is myself, and I have a history of allergies. I went through the series, and I've been 30 years without a problem. Maybe it wouldn't be 31 if something happened. So I hope they get it straightened out for the better of beekeepers and everybody with allergies.
And I'm not worried about the one sting. I'm worried about that one day that all beekeepers have when you get multiple stings, and that's when you get more than the typical one or two zings.
And if you haven't yet, Jeff, take a look at his new book, The History of Beekeeping in Vermont. He and Bill Mayers did a good book. I got to get those names straight. Bill Mayers is a co-author. Bill Mraz is Charlie Mraz's son. And Charlie Mraz used to write for Bee Culture magazine when I was there for a lot of years. Charlie Mraz was known for his apitherapy information and for his beekeeping information. His son, Bill, is just a beekeeper. I don't mean just a beekeeper, but he's a beekeeper. He still collects venom and takes care of business that way. So just to clear up that confusion, Bill Mraz, Charlie Mraz, and Ross Conrad. Those are the names to get clear.
There you go.
Okay.
And you're Kim, and I'm Jeff.
Okay.
Okay. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Do you know who you are? Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. Even better, write a review and let other beekeepers looking for a new podcast know what you like. You can get there directly from our website by clicking on reviews along the top of any web page. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of the Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We want to thank Strong Microbials for their support of the podcast. Check out their full probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. We want to thank Better Bee for joining us as a supporter. Check out their full line of beekeeping supplies at www.betterbee.com. And finally, and most importantly, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else we should mention, Kim?
No, I don't think so. We're getting more questions, and that's good. We appreciate those.
You bet. Thanks a lot, everybody.